welcome back, everyone. We're here on the MSP Cyber Roundtable today, talking to Bill Falk and Assaf Litai from Actifile. They're in the DLP segment, data loss prevention. We'll get more into that later. Bill, how's breakfast
Yes.
going?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. It's 2:30 though, at least Eastern time here, and I just caught you during breakfast. So you got to tell us what's in that bowl, man.
It just means that it's been a long morning. It's the last day of June. I'm a sales guy and focused on that. It's if you really want to know, it's mainly yogurt and berries. I'm in California, so go ahead and laugh and make a joke.
Well, are there acai berries in there? Like,
They're just blueberries.
Just blueberries. All right.
There's no granola. If that's good, I guess.
Assaf, what'd you have today?
No, sausage and eggs and the real stuff that IT people and security people eat.
Yeah, I started my morning with a granola bar, had the leftover pasta. Anyway, I'm looking forward to the weekend. I'm gonna get the grill out. So, Assaf, I want to start with you today. We just met, first of all, so I have like a tiny little edge of a background, but I would love to know like where you came from. You're super smart. Did you start your career in cybersecurity area, or like how did you end up here?
So actually, I started my career after university in the military, in the Navy. And worked on a lot of different systems, naval systems, and whether they're on the attack side or the defensive, mostly on the defensive side. So the cybersecurity kind of aspect was not new to me from the sort of different types of attacks and different types of systems. After the military, founded a company called Port Authority Technologies, which was one of the 2 or 3 first data loss prevention solutions, enterprise DLP, back in 2000. Remember, we were busy with Y2K at the time, expecting the world to end and so forth. And everybody was sitting in 1999, the 31st of December, waiting for everything to crumble, and it didn't.
But people had to work really hard to not, like, there were a lot of systems that would have crumbled if not for some like last minute fixes. And I was, my employer at the time was like, they were operating off of their whole system, their whole company ran off BASIC, with 2-digit years. It that was real.
So I discovered that one-way airlines got rid of the problem was to get rid of the year. It was written in some shorthand on the tickets, but then it was removed. And I was able to use a ticket that I didn't use a year before, a year later, because the airline couldn't figure out. They were like, this date, there is no flight. So I don't understand how this, but then they just issued a new ticket, and that was the end of that. So there were a lot of loopholes created when they were solving the Y2K issue, and some business lost. Like you might take advantage of that if you knew about the way it was resolved. So founded a company called Port Authority Technologies, which was one of the first DLP solutions. We were one of the first enterprise grade DLPs. We were along with a company called Vontu, which was acquired by Symantec. We were the leaders in the Gartner quadrant. And we sold the company to WebSense. It became ForcePoint DLP. So anybody who's aware of the DLP market and knows ForcePoint DLP, that's a product that me and my team developed over multiple years in the early 2000s. And then stayed with WebSense as responsible for strategic accounts, responsible for the DLP overlay, and so forth. DLP is a much more consultative sale than is filtering and email filtering, web filtering, and so forth. So that was an interesting challenge. After that, founded a company, seeing that DLP was an interesting challenge to sell. Founded a company in the sales enablement space, sold that to Big Tin Can out of Sydney, Australia. And after that, some friend told me you should talk to Guy because he has something in protection of data. And I said, there's nothing new under the sun. Why would, and I spoke with Guy for a couple of meetings. And there were definitely new concepts and new ideas and new ways we can try to make DLP work with far less user engagement and much better ROI than the traditional DLP has provided.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of change there over the years in the some things like firewalls haven't really changed that much, right? Like yeah, we've packaged lots of other like inspection tools into the marketing thing called a firewall, but like technically like an access list on your firewall works the same as it did 20 years ago, but DLP doesn't work anything like it worked 20 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, has been a really interesting evolution. What's also interesting to me is basically you've always been a security guy. And I don't hear that too much because a lot of people end up in security. They're oftentimes they fall into security. Like I was pulled there by my clients when I was in MSP world. Everyone was just screaming security, and I ended up in security assessments. So that's what happened to me. But that's you're like pure. Your blood is blue, like the blue of security. I think is really what's going on. But
I think that I also think that data kind of works in between security, IT, right? Because it touches on workforce efficiency and stuff like that, and at the same time on the compliance aspect. So with DLP normally, or with data security normally, you might find yourself at the C-level suite and so forth, speaking with very senior level people, because the implications of data, right? The implications of IT are obtuse in that, right? You have some sort of vulnerability, some CVE somewhere on one of your JavaScript, parts of your system. Who knows what the implications are? You can't talk to the VP of HR about what the implications of that are. But data, when you talk about employee records, VP of HR has an understanding of what it means if that data gets lost, has an understanding of, what are the implications. So when you're talking about data, it's not just security, it's also you're talking to the business owners. And that's where it's very interesting, because it basically takes the MSP or the MSSP that's willing to take a look at data and allow them access to the boardroom or to the company.
I know a lot of our partners are having success in their security solutions sales by looking at the data and talking about the data and securing the data rather than focusing on the technology, right? And that's huge in our industry right now. It's huge in terms of the opportunity, but it's also huge in terms of it's really the best way to talk to your customers that they do understand the data, they use it every day, and they don't understand the technology. That's your job, usually, is what they think.
Yep.
So, thank you, Assaf. Bill, I'm curious, like, what are all the widgets you've sold over the years, and did you start out in sales? Like, what's your journey been?
Yeah, it's been in sales. My mom bought me a blue pinstripe suit and a briefcase when I graduated from college, and it was like, there's the door, and go figure out how to sell something. But my story's not nearly as interesting as Assaf's, but I'll do my best to fill in the blanks. My thing, the interesting thing about it, first of all, I've been involved in the MSP market since 2003. I was very early at Kaseya. I've had sales leadership roles in Kaseya and Datto, and then at Infrascale, and now at Actifile. So what's fascinated me throughout is not the blocking and tackling of selling. It's the understanding of what's happening within the markets that allows for creativity and innovation to position your solutions in a way that can help move markets or can help optimize the movement that may already be occurring in the market. So it's at a really strategic level that it starts with me. And whether it was early days in MSP land, where it was all about the shift in the business model from break fix to recurring revenue, and all we talked about at Kaseya was, we're going to help you build a recurring revenue business. It had nothing to do with the technology. And that theme has been recreated multiple times. And it also illustrates what we talk about as a category creation. It's a new category or a subcategory within the broader context, and that gives a lot of clarity on how you should go to market. And the other example and the other thing about me is I've always been fascinated with the data. Back to even before Kaseya, selling financial software, it was all about the data and understanding the data and what you could do with the data and report from the data and so forth. And then it morphed into data protection, more from a backup and disaster recovery standpoint. But I was always fascinated with that as not only a need in the market, but just the how it was done was always very interesting to me. And again, as another example of understanding market shifts, was that in about 2007, recognizing that MSPs weren't providing a backup service to their customers. They were maybe going on site and talking about, hey, those tapes need to go, into the bank security deposit box.
They were selling backup hardware and backup
hardware
software,
and maybe talking, but it was all on-prem. And then, because Kaseya had this remote monitoring tool or platform, that we did a deal with Acronis, that it wasn't about the tech, it was about putting those MSPs in the backup business. And that was the theme, and it was successful. There's been a number of those examples for me in my career, and it happens to be the same thing that we're doing here now.
It didn't just put them in the backup business. I think it created the MSP business, because before the need for strong BCDR, because technology, if you rewind 30 years ago, right? Technology was an enabling tool in business, right? Around that time you're talking about, right? It became critical as all of your staff in if your IT's down, everything's down. And as a service provider, right? Or what we now think of as service provider, right? What's the biggest service that your client's going to buy from you? It's don't be down, right? And before that, it was just, hey, I'm going to sell you some stuff and maybe help you install it, and then I'm going to walk away, right? And so I think that was the beginning of the MSP service sector, was really taking that seriously and turning, and the same thing's happening in security right now, right?
Yeah.
Which is, now it's not just like don't be down. It's like don't be down and don't let your data leak out like all over the place, right? And,
the other comparison I make into the whatever various audiences is that if you look back to like 02, 03, the time period that Assaf was talking about, antivirus didn't really even exist. And if it existed, you talk to people in SMB particularly about viruses, and they're like, no, I'm not sick, right? It's like, I don't have a virus. But ultimately, people started hearing about it. And then if a service provider was engaged in helping their customer with some sort of defense, it was an on-prem solution. It might have been going around and actually touching all the endpoints that they needed to secure, to where it went eventually to managed antivirus, to now EDR, MDR. The data security topic is an exact parallel to that, based on where we are today. It's not well understood, and hopefully with this forum, we're educating the market a little bit more. But it's not understood. But I can promise you that it's got the same trademarks of antivirus, 2 years ago.
Mhm.
Very interesting.
You're taking me back to the virus bulletin days
That's
when we
right.
would have to close port 1003,
Yeah.
whatever bong or whatever
All
it's called.
right. Well, we'll jump into DLP land and like that's the topic of the day. What is this DLP thing? But before we do that, we get a little bit of a lecture, which Assaf is kindly going to help support here because usually I'm taking the knowledge expert seat, but today it's going to be Assaf. He's going to talk to us about the fair assessment model. And there's a lot of types of security assessments out there, so maybe we could spend a moment on that. But CIS is a big champion of FAIR, the Center for Internet Security, and it might be worth talking about why, and then of course like how does this thing work? Because being able to accurately assess risk these days, right, is or not accurately, right, effectively being able to effectively assess risk is really what helps an organization justify those investments in IT security that we all know our end clients need. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to you, Asaf, and I think I'm on the wrong slide here, but we have this high level what is fair. So tell us what is fair.
Okay, so first of all, I highly recommend that everybody go head to the Fair Institute org site and sign up. I think it's free of charge, and you get access to a lot of information, far more than we can cover here. But FAIR came from, right? So remember, we spoke about how to talk to the business owner about risk. And when we talk about viruses and we talk about EDRs and we talk about vulnerabilities and CVEs, it doesn't mean a lot to them because you cannot convert this to any financial risk or any business risk. So disaster recovery, they understand the business risk that's associated. Every hour down is, depending on the size of the organization, $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, and so forth. There's all kinds of numbers for per size of organization. So when you talk about business continuity, everybody understands what the risk is, and that's why it's very easy to explain to a business owner why you need business continuity. When you talk about data risk, when you talk about information loss and so forth, it's a far more fuzzy sort of discussion, right? You talk about, there's a back door in one library that we use on our application.
Well, before you go into fuzzy, let's just what you mean by fuzzy, right? Like technically, if you're gonna use an actuarial model for risk, right? It's what is the full list of assets, which even asset management is like an impossible job these days. What's everything you could consider an asset in your business, from people to machines to information, right? And then you have to figure out all the possible ways that information might be vulnerable, right? And then you have to figure out which is like, again, one of those unlimited lists, everything from every CVE in your environment, every theoretical thing that can happen, like someone tripping over a plug and unplugging something, right? A building burning down, right? And then you have to look at every possible threat actor in the world, every possible threat that could come in and through those vulnerabilities and hurt assets. And if you do all these calculations, n times n times n, right? You end up with I think I'm going to use the word a bazillion rows in a spreadsheet, right? Which, if you total up, gives you like the theoretical amount of risk, which is like an impossible process, actually, right? So when you say fuzzy, what you mean is like that is like an impossible process, right? Like
that is that is an impossible process, and it's an impossible process for a customer to do on their own. And especially when they have limited amount of data, like you found vulnerabilities through your Qualys, VA process. So at the end of the day, what FAIR basically attempted to do was to try to define this process and to try to find how to best present the risk in the sort of language that the business expects. And if we think about, like, what a business expects when they think about losing physical assets, like if you have a couple of warehouses, then you say, okay, what's the likelihood of the warehouse being compromised, broken into? And then you take into consideration everything around that warehouse, like which neighborhood it's in. Is it a neighborhood that has a lot of breaking in? If that's the situation, then your premiums are going to go up. Is it a pretty safe neighborhood with a lot of police and a lot of and so forth? So in that case, the expected frequency of events is going to go down, and you multiply that by the value of the stuff inside the warehouse, and obviously how much time it takes to steal all the stuff, and how many times there's guards going through and so forth. So you make an assessment of how much you're going to lose for those warehouses over time, and that's what you insure them for. And now if we talk about data, we talk about information, then it's basically going to be the same process. We need to understand how much information we have. We need to somehow price it. We're going to talk about how we price it. And then we're going to have to figure out what is our loss event frequency. And then we go and we model everything that you said, which is using some sort of mathematical gadgetry called Monte Carlo analysis. And we're going to come up with a probability for different amounts. So what's the likelihood that you're going to lose $100? Probably almost 100%. What is it that you're going to lose $1,000? Probably 99%. At some point there's going to be a peak, and then it's going to go back down again to the maximum value of your data. Now, it's very unlikely that you're going to lose the entirety of your data, just because hopefully you do have some security and somebody will notice we talked about firewalls, the firewalls flashing with the data flowing through them, and all the indicators showing that something is wrong, logs filling up quickly. So eventually somebody's going to stop it, and they won't be able to steal all the data. So it's unlikely that you're going to have 100% exposure, but you're going to have some sort of combination of a couple of machines, a couple of servers, a couple of, so forth, that are going to be to some percentage of them stolen. And then you're going to assess what is the value of the data that's on those servers. And there are two types of losses that are associated with that. The first is called primary losses. Primary losses are out-of-pocket expenses. So if I compromised your server, then you're going to have to take that server down, do some forensics, and do all that. And then you're going to have to recover that server. So maybe you don't trust the software on it anymore. So you want to take some sort of backup from who knows when back. And then you're going to have to work on fixing the data that's in the server, in those databases and stuff like that. So how much is the cost of handling the losses, out-of-pocket expenses, lawyers, things of that sort? And then secondary risk is everything that has to do with what I call the expected unexpected, which are basically things like lawsuits, like things such as reputation losses, things such as penalties, right? So not every event you're going to get penalized. Not every event is going to make it to the press. Not every event is going to make it to where it's publicly, it makes you a public persona. But some percentage of events are going to do that, and some percentage of events are going to get the auditors and the regulators interested and might get you fines and penalties.
So the secondary risks sometimes, it sounds like, are not necessarily very serious, or they don't happen very frequently. But I know that there are times when the primary loss event is no big deal, right? But the secondary loss event is like makes worldwide news, right? And so it's important to consider. as you're talking through this, I realize that some of our audience may not realize that this type of risk analysis. It's really popular for people that need to put a dollar amount on the risk, right? And there are other methods to do this. So there's a NIST method. There's an ISO method. One of the great things about FAIR is in terms of quantifying risk assessment and putting a dollar amount on risk. It's one of the more straightforward or easier methods to do that. As you said, there's step by step. They've got great guides at the FAIR Institute. But not every client's going to need this, right? This is your larger enterprise that needs to justify making a strategic investment in cybersecurity, right? Not a tactical one. They need to think ahead. What are they going to budget? How much are they going to invest? What are they going to invest in? But also, I know insurers are really interested in this. And these things you're talking about, this type of actuarial science, I know that carriers and underwriters are eating and breathing this stuff. And I can only imagine that if you're able to do this for your clients and tell that story to the insurers, it probably makes things a lot easier to price that risk. Of course, this presumes that the dollar amount you come up with at the end of the day is reasonable, and you may need to do some security things to get it to that reasonable place. Assaf, I'm curious, where have you run into the most value here on this? Like, where are people? What are the great wins here? Or Bill, maybe you can think of some great wins where someone, they weren't able to get that risk. Or they weren't able to get that investment, that security investment across the line, and then they go through this type of this deep risk assessment exercise, and it's moved the needle.
So I can take a first stab at this. So when you go and you do a DLP analysis, you're not giving a full picture of this, right? So if you want to do a full fair risk assessment, it's actually pretty involved, and the reason is they require you, as you said, you take an Excel spreadsheet and you put everything, or they have an application risk lens, and you take as much as you can about any event that you had and any sort of system that you have and every data piece that you have and all primary and secondary losses. You need lawyers, you need PR, you need all those. So do as accurate a job as you can. You don't have to be very accurate with the numbers, but you have to be close to the numbers so that your outcome is going to be reasonable. But the more you put into it, the better the results are going to be. But when you go to the business owner and you say, listen, you have this amount, you think, right, in your head as a business owner, you sort of assume that the loss magnitude is low. Why? Because you think, you've been told, you imagine that your employees are deleting data, that your employees are not keeping PII, that your employees are not keeping copies of PHI, that your employees are not, I don't know what you're thinking about, but your accountants are not keeping a lot of data. And you don't have the right, you're not thinking about every day you're getting 150 receipts and you're dumping them in a folder somewhere, and some of your accountants are putting them locally, some of them are keeping it on their laptops, some of them are doing all kinds of things, and you're not aware and you're not calculating in your head every day what that comes out to be over 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. So then when an event happens, you're sort of blindsided by, what happens. So just showing how much data they have a lot of times and how much data is being used a lot of times wakes them up, and they run through this sort of calculations inside their head. And I think that from a perspective of, right, I work a lot with MSPs, and MSPs definitely cannot do the sort of thing that the large enterprises that I used to work with in the past would do. But understanding the components would help you make the story much more palpable for your customer, right? Explaining to them what a breach scenario looks like in their organization based on the amount of data that they have.
It sounds like one of the things you're highlighting here is that this fair risk assessment model requires expertise to run through in complete form for an organization. But in a sales scenario, a service provider can actually they can use the methods here to drill down on a specific area of risk, and have a credible conversation about why this is the right way to be looking at risk, and why that should inform an investment decision. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and you
Yeah, and
basically say, listen, if you don't have any data, then I recommend then you recommend security because for uptime, and that's the main reason. But if you have a lot of data, then think about what the implications of not having security are, right?
Mhm.
So
and I would add a couple things to that. There's a couple interesting things happening here, and some of it, go back to some of the comments and the opening about what's happening, from a market level. So first of all, as we all know, a lot of technology starts in the enterprise and then moves down into smaller businesses, right? It happens all the time. This is a very good example of that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, to Assaf's last point, it the it doesn't need to be as complicated as the fair model is. So I mean, we've been in this business for a few years out now, and I'm pretty sure there isn't one MSP that we work with who's had to have a discussion with a customer about fair. That I would think is nonsensical in this context. What is, though, very interesting is that the concepts themselves derived from this model and this discussion are being used in support of the very important business discussions that MSPs are having with their clients, and leading them in the right direction. Their customers aren't waking up and saying, hey, we need a data security tool and it needs to be supportive of FAIR. No, they might be waking up to say, maybe I'm a little worried about how much data I have. And then it's really up to the forward-thinking, innovative MSP to accept that, and then again to lead and bring their consultative expertise with this discussion, with the topics within this discussion, to their customers. We've spent a lot of time educating our partners about the fact that this is a business discussion, and it's about risk, it's about compliance, it's not technology, it's about really important business discussions. Just like in the antivirus, it was about virus, or in the backup, it was about data protection and business continuity, and nothing to do really with the technology. So history is repeating itself, which is fun.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm hearing you say is that this looking at a model like this really gives both the service provider and their customer a language, to even think about risk, to even be able to think about what are the right, how much do I need to invest and how do I need to invest it. If they don't understand some of these concepts, how can they possibly make those investment decisions? And you're right, they don't need to go through the model to understand that, right? But they do need to understand things like, well, there's loss frequency and there's loss magnitude, right? And there's the things that happen the first, there's the things that happen later. And so the customer starts thinking about, oh, you're right, I need to protect from all of those different things in these different ways.
Yeah. And then there's the intangible, or the not so scientific part of it. What you're saying is absolutely true. And there's a mathematical formula that can be used to illustrate amount of risk today versus what you want it to be tomorrow, from a numerical perspective. And maybe that feeds their cyber insurance policy, or certainly their compliance. Their ability to be compliant is more objective. But then the subjective part of it for both the MSP and the end customer is, can I sleep at night? Right? Is it okay to walk away from the business understanding that things are under control? And then the other element, and we can move on, is this is a whole other session perhaps, is that what what we understand is that MSPs are in this together with their end customer. They are locked together in the fight against external threats, and in some cases, it's a legal connection, right? They're bound to provide security services, and for the MSP to be able to look out across all of their customers, no matter how many they have, and look at it at that level, and then you get into their own risk tolerance discussion as a service provider and the things they should be doing to get in within a window that they're comfortable with. Again, maybe for another day.
Well,
So for
I
an
think,
MS,
yeah, go ahead, Assaf.
yeah, so for an MSP to treat the two tenants, one of which has a lot of PII and a lot of PHI and a lot of data, and the other which doesn't, and to treat them both as if they're the same in terms of security and so forth. Are there implications, liability for the MSP? Are there implications as to what is expected from the MSP to tell the customer, to warn the customer, right? So when I tell the customer that there might be vulnerabilities, there might be, is the important thing is to talk about the technical aspects of the vulnerability, or is it to talk about the possible implications for that organization? So comes to mind the recent case in Sacramento, which was, I think, more to do with ransomware, but at the end of the day, it's all a question of what the customer is expecting from the MSP. Another thing to think about from an MSP perspective is if none of your customers are interested in data, so are they really not interested in data, or is some other MSSP or MSP basically talking to them? Because at the end of the day, assets, whether they're physical assets or whether they're data assets, is something that people are learning about and are going to ask the questions if you did not come there first to talk with them about this and to talk with them about what this means to them.
So I think this is a good segue. As we think about these investments in protecting data. You guys are in the DLP space. We'll get more into what you do later, but data loss protection is a really interesting. It's a really interesting topic in cybersecurity because it's I feel like it has endless depth. In many areas of security, it's really obvious what a thing does, right? In a firewall, we get that, like, okay, the firewall stops bad things from going past this point, right? There's a lot of solutions out there that have very specific meanings. Even the thing that we sell this GRC product that governance, risk, and compliance. It goes across all of cybersecurity, but it's really like at this thin layer of like just helping you navigate these really complicated standards, right, and helping you document and evidence it. DLP, I've had a hard time pinning this down, and I just took a look earlier today to look at some security standards and say, okay, well, how are these? When do we need DLP? Like, what security standards require DLP, data loss prevention? And I see some references. CIS has a control in there that says, do you have a DLP system to help you X, Y, or Z? But that it's oftentimes difficult to point to because what is data loss prevention is the outcome, right? It's the solution you're buying. How you actually get there from a technical perspective has changed a lot over the last 20 years. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that evolution so that when people hear this acronym, DLP, they have any idea of what that is or what it isn't. But I know, as a security professional, I don't usually set out to look for a DLP solution. What usually happens is I'm trying to achieve a level of security, and I run across these requirements that I'm like, well, how the hell am I going to do that? That sounds impossible unless, and then like, oh, there's this magical DLP solution that like stamps watermarks on files or like locks down systems or like tracks data around places that people don't know where it is. It follows, it tracks down who's accessing what data when. There's all there's all these like magical things that need to get done. And I say magical from the perspective of these are some really nuanced technical targets that if you don't have a specialized tool, there's no way to actually do the thing, right? So like if someone downloads a file, right, how do you even know that they downloaded it, and how do you know where it went, right? How do you know who downloaded it? And if you know they downloaded a file, how do you know what was in the file? Was it something that's allowed to flow out, or is it not something that's allowed to flow out, right? Those are like as a sysadmin, like oftentimes people just like are like, I don't know, that's impossible, like, and they move on. But the reality is, if you're going to really protect an organization at a high level, you do need to know what data is being accessed by who. You need to be able to control that a little bit, and you need to be able to stop the data from flowing to places it's not supposed to flow to. So that's the setup, Assaf. And I refer to DLP frequently with my clients, but it's always in different contexts. So tell me about, like, you've been in DLP a long time. What did this mean 20 years ago? What did it mean 10 years ago? What is it now? Because I'm actually confused on the topic.
So an interesting, you started off by saying what frameworks and so forth talk about DLP. So now our big daddy is talking about DLP. So ISO 27001 version 2022 talks about data loss.
Does it define what it is?
No, absolutely no. So yeah, so going back 20 years, 24 years ago to be, I feel old now. So it basically was a control that we added on email, web uploads, and FTP uploads. That was the original Trinity, and then discovery on endpoints and servers got added. And the idea was
what? Yeah, okay. Tell me what those things actually did.
Okay, so those controls. So in the beginning, I don't know if you were there, but in the beginning, Vontu tried to call it reverse firewall. We called it information loss prevention, and then eventually DLP became, I think, McAfee coined the term DLP, if I remember correctly. I might not. And or Reconex, the precursor to McAfee's DLP. And the issue was, you went to a bank or an insurance company and you saw tons of email, and I mean a boatload of email, chock full of sensitive PII, so things such as social security numbers, credit card numbers, sent out in the clear. So you would go to like one of
these. This was back when email was unencrypted and uncontrolled, like would randomly float around the internet to the wrong servers all the time, right?
All the time, yeah. And the government would require you to send these lists of people who did not pay their loans, and the credit card companies would require, and they would require it by email because they were moving off of fax, and nobody liked to retype stuff from the fax and stuff like that. So the big banks were required to do that, but at the same time, you started having regulations like eventually PCI DSS, GLBA, and so forth that required you. Everybody was already sensing that the regulation was going to stop this sort of free, everybody does whatever they want. And DLP became that control that basically looked and read each one of the emails and opened the attachments, opened the zip files, opened the Excel spreadsheets and inside the zip files, and would read it and say, oh, it has 20,000 SSN, so let's block it. Let's send the response back saying we blocked it, and let's allow the owner to release, or the guy's boss to release the emails. So there would be these special release emails, and some of us would have these routing to, you would set up an SMTP gateway with opportunistic, so it's SSL, TLS type encryption, and they would communicate with the credit card companies using TLS tunneling and so forth. So DLP, that's the source. That's where DLP started. there were also companies that were trying to do it at the endpoint. So SafeEnd and some of the others were trying to do it at the endpoint, and some of these got acquired and merged and so forth, and became this weird.
What would they do on the endpoint? Like, oh, I found a file that looks like it has social security numbers in it. I'm gonna what? Quarantine it, block it, encrypt it?
Yeah, prevent you from uploading it to certain applications from certain websites and
Oh,
so
it would
forth.
actually, like,
Yeah.
when you say prevent from upload, you're saying there'd be like a hook in
Yeah.
the I guess the file access routines, right? That would literally not allow you
To
to
do
move the
certain
file.
against
Yeah, allow
policy.
you to, if the contents were such that weren't supposed to go there. Like, it can't go into the browser. It can't go. Some
Exactly. No,
control.
or particular URLs. There were all kinds of controls that were available. And at the end of the day, they were trying to understand how the data was flowing and so forth. The problem with DLP is that it required a lot of effort to try to understand what is an allowed policy and what isn't an allowed policy. And you would have FTEs for full term equivalents employees, full term employees to manage this thing and to understand how data was flowing, to the extent that you talked about the ka-ching moment for a lot of the companies. I can give you an example of one huge loan company in the US. I won't say names or anything like that, which were sitting on their DLP for 6 months. And then one day, one of their senior VPs sent an email full of loan, numbers and so forth and PII. So they called him up and asked him why he did this. And he said, if I do it, maybe others are doing it. And they said, well, many, many people are doing it all day long. So he said they wanted to see. And at that moment, I got a phone call and said, we need to stop and block and create policies. And the CEO got involved, and everything was haywire from that moment on until they got control of the thing. So the DLP created that visibility that the IT did not know what to do with this, because, right, this is so.
So wait, just slow down here. So this was first it was I guess blocking emails, then it was blocking files, and then it was sort of intelligence on what's happening. And I'm imagining that this is maybe like 15 years ago. And at that time, I remember things. There was other stuff going on here outside like the traditional enterprise IT environment, because we started introducing printers that had and this is still, people may not know this. Most printers that are sold today embed serial numbers into every page that's printed, right? It's like tiny little, right? But if you copy it, if this page leaks out, you can figure out which printer it came from. We also had around that time that I remember in the did anyone pirate movies? In the early 2000s, you bought them on the subway or whatever. Yeah, Bill's shaking his head. I got those DVDs off the train, and I remember you'd open them up and they'd have like these like color patches on the screen and stuff like that, moving logos. And I understand you could actually figure out which person had this this approved copy. Like, you could see like, okay, who had that preview, and you'd be able to blame an individual person, right? I also know, and this started a long time ago, but I was reminded of it because I opened a document this morning that had my name embedded in a watermark in the corner. And I know that they could have hidden that, right, so that I couldn't see it, but they intentionally said this is licensed to with my name, Matt Fish, in it, because they wanted me to know I'm not supposed to share this thing. And that was introduced around that time as well, right? So where did we move, from, watching things that are, moving across, I guess the desktop and the email server? Then what are the other things that have happened over the last 15 years?
So what you're referring to is the non-repudiation, is all the technologies that were used to be able to prove who leaked data and so forth. So if you have a script for a particular TV show, you can figure out who it was that leaked it, or an Oscars screener that the movie directors get and so forth. So you'll know who's the person who leaked it. The issue for IT was, I think, a little bit more difficult. I think the issue for IT is that data. So IT is used to having bad and good actors, bad and good information. So viruses are bad, data is good. Business applications are good, backdoor applications are bad, and so forth. Data is not inherently good or bad. It's actually pretty good. Having a lot of data means you have a lot of customers. Having a lot of customers is a good thing. Being a doctor with a big clinic and a lot of patients is good, but it also means there's going to be a lot of PHI. When you're a store, a retailer, and you have a lot of stubs, a lot of credit card transactions, that's a good thing. If you don't have a lot, you're probably going to close down, and and data loss is not going to be your primary concern. So at the end of the day, for IT, suddenly they get this thing where data is it good? Is it bad? The DLP is saying, listen, you have to be careful. This thing has a weight that's associated with it were it to leak out. Were it to leak out, there are hardships ahead. And those might not be insignificant. Those might be very significant. If they're a large number, in those days we were talking about the Target leaks and so forth. You're talking about 100 million, all kinds of weird numbers, millions of records being leaked out from the different, I think, Equifax, like how many times that company was up there in those lists. And, the Health and Human Services would issue all the doctors that had data losses from the office of the OCR. And suddenly data was not good, not bad. You have to be careful with data. And that's something that IT took, I think, quite some time to get used to. And it's something that the MSPs now have to get used to it as well, which is data is good. It means your tenant, your customer is successful, but it also means now they have a warehouse full of stuff that can be stolen. And that means that if somebody gets into that warehouse of stuff that can be stolen, they have to be very careful. And that's where the example of that loan company goes into place, where the minute the business realized what was going on, they got involved. And then the marching orders for IT became a lot clearer. And this loops back to what you were saying, which is, what is DLP? It depends on the level of risk that the business owner is willing to take.
Well, I'm curious where this brings us to today. We're in 2024. Actifile's got a forward-leaning technology and value proposition. I wanna geek out on the technology in just a minute, but Bill, I'm curious what you're finding the drivers are right now. I know that our providers that I talk to, one of the biggest drivers in cyber investment right now are the insurance forms. And the service providers are pretty good at answering, like, do you have this security technology? Do you have that security technology? They absolutely are lost on the data page on every single one of those cyber insurance apps, where it's like, what types of data do you have and how many records do you have? And they're just like, they're scratching their head. They have no idea. So I'm curious, is that one of the drivers that you're seeing right now?
Big time. And I think it's fair to say that it's early days for this it's just early days. It's not a mature part of the equation yet, but the innovative cyber insurers are recognizing that the combination of the right technology and their policies will shift the economics in insurance. And believe it or not, I think many of the innovative insurance companies are all about driving costs out of the equation. The cost to underwrite, so that can include understanding what it is that you're trying to protect, which is the data. Knowing the value of the data can drive the economics. And then on back end, if there's a breach, then are there tools in place that can drive cost out of the incident response, which is, over the last 5 years, the key, the one single thing that has driven premiums through the roof is the cost of an incident response. And so the innovative insurers recognize that. They're also recognizing the partnership, if you will, between the technology, between the MSPs and the end customer. And ultimately, I can tell you right now where it's going is that you're going to see a time in the not too distant future where the combination of the insurance and the right technology will reduce the premiums to a level that those savings can actually help fund or offset the cost of the technology that you need to drive the premiums down in the first place. That's the circular business model shift that I see coming fairly soon.
Well, I've heard a similar story out of insurers, but it still comes down to like, and I sometimes laugh at them, and they're like, okay, the application's really simple. If we just have this bit of information, we're going to be able to, whatever the insurer story is. And I'm like, these customers have no idea how much data they have. You're asking for a record count. They know what industry they're in. They could tell you how much money they made last year. They have no idea how much data they have. And there's MSPs that are supposed to be in charge of their environments. They've never counted data records either. So I understand that Actifile, like you guys actually can plug into Office 365 and like how do you like what's best practice for finding this data these days? How do you quantify this? Because I know that you literally can't apply for insurance without knowing this stuff these days, right?
Well, I don't know if that's 100% true. I think you can get insurance. You may pay a higher premium, but it's pretty straightforward for us that aren't in the insurance business to know that the insurance company needs to know what it is that they're insuring. When you get homeowners insurance, they want to know the square footage, how the house is built. Do you have a fire alarm? Do you have a smoke detector? Do you have a watchdog? Whatever. And that drives the premium. In this context, it's like, what data do you have? And how much of it is sensitive? And what is the value? What's the potential cost to the organization if there's a breach? So those dots are definitely starting to get connected in the marketplace. And shameless plug, Actifile is a great tool for harvesting the data. The favorite question I ask these days in the market is, do you really know where your data is? Or do you really know where your customers' data is? And no disrespect to any of the MSPs in the audience, you can't answer that question without a tool like Actifile. You don't know what data you have. You don't know where it is. You don't know the value of
People
the data.
can guess, right? You can guess,
right?
but
you can guess, but guessing won't cut it. Ultimately, maybe for insurance, but certainly not for compliance. It's the compliance, the regulation's a little more strict.
Well,
when it comes to that.
I'm sure it's okay if your record count's a little wrong, but I think if you're guessing and you get it really wrong, your insurer would be happy to deny claim.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Or they'll say that it's underinsured, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And prorate the payer.
Yep. Yeah. Well, do you have any like sophisticated like one-liners you want to leave our audience with, or do you want to give them any takeaways in terms of like what should they be thinking about, like that they're not thinking about right now? We have a moment, and then we're gonna call it for the day.
I guess for me, it's I've commented on this. The message for me is be a leader in your market. Lead your customer base to where they need to go. Because in my experience, if I've seen this happen, if you wait or if you're reactive, then that end customer may be talking to someone else. And for sure, if it's a regulated customer, there's no waiting is over. You can't wait because I think it's obvious. You can't wait anymore. But be a leader. That's what I would say.
Assaf, what about you?
So I think that we talked about ISO 27001 version 2022, NYCRR 500, the FTC safeguard rules, and so forth. When the FTC safeguard rules are very interesting because almost every company in the U.S., anybody who gives you any sort of financing or anything like that is covered. So everybody now is a bank. It turns out that this is something that is happening, and and if in the past you could sit it out, and so you need to think about data, whether you think about it. I would shamelessly plug Actifile, but if not with Actifile, then something else, and start thinking about your customers' data, because it's something that they need and your customers need, and if you don't do it, somebody else will.
Well, thanks, guys. So we're gonna just do a quick sign off here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Join us again next time. Now, next week is going to be July 5th. We actually did a pre-record, so I've already got my sneak preview. But you're going to be able to hear from Anthony Collette, who works at Louis Dava Information Security, and this is this is interesting. They're actually a physical product company. They make physical cybersecurity learning tools, things that use dice, things you can touch and feel in the real world. Super interesting. Join us if you'd like next time. Thank you, and join, like, subscribe. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you.
Oh, I gotta actually hit the button.